Because at a school district, we have a lot of sensitive data, private information, things like that. You don't want everyone to have access. And one of the offerings that at least Microsoft is making for Copilot is it can actually see the data within your tenant. So your emails, your Microsoft Teams, they've been very vocal about all the cool stuff you can do with Teams and all that stuff. So we're doing a readiness assessment. They're going to check out our security and configuration, talk about what we want to do. We do a lot of Google stuff. We do a lot of Microsoft stuff. Our particular industry, or at least our district, are not a lot of Amazon, but those are the two we do. So we chose Microsoft because we had to choose one, and our infrastructure underneath is typically Microsoft. So I was playing around with it. We just got access to it, and sure enough, I said, well, let me do something fun here. And I said, create me a slide deck on data mesh that's at least 20 slides long, and it produced the whole thing. And actually, it was fairly good. So I was really surprised. I'm like, oh, I'm out of a job. But it was neat though. Of course, it didn't have all the fun graphics, and there's a lot of work to do with it. But first of all, before we get into this, I want to see who's here. You guys all may know each other. You all may have IPAs on Thursday nights all the time and pizza, but I don't know you. So just so I can get an understanding of the audience, what kind of roles here? You just screaming out data engineers, leadership, business folks. How many are data engineers? All your day long, your pipelines and stuff. Yeah. Okay. What about software developers? Okay, cool. That's my crew. Operations folks, you manage the infrastructure? No, a little bit. Okay, cool. Any business folks? Oh, okay, nice, thanks. Any leadership? You've been crowned with that hat. You get to do evaluations, decide where things go. Cool. Okay, cool. Consultants? Well, yeah, we all consult on the side. That helps me. So small teams, large teams, what do you guys have? Are you in a large IT group or a data group? Talking like 20, 30 people plus? Smaller teams? Yeah, okay. How many of you, most of your data is on-prem? And I don't care which data center, I don't care where, but really it's in your house. One, there's only one. Wow. The rest of you, let's go to the other extreme. How much is, I would say 80 to 90% of your data is in the cloud in some sort? Private, public, whatever. Okay, cool. Hybrid, a lot of people are hybrid. Okay, cool. So most of our data is still in-house. We are looking at moving it to the cloud for various reasons. We're a school district, we're small. We don't have a lot of engineering staff. So, and I am giving a talk in a couple of weeks on us moving entirely to cloud first for a lot of our data center stuff. So we're kind of excited and anxiety filled with that. But challenges, just throw them out real quick. Just any challenge. Do you love your data pipeline? Do you think it's the best thing ever? Slick, you're able to meet all your demands in 24 hours or less? No? Just a challenge. Is it too complex? Too hard to train on? Yeah.
Data discovery is a challenge.
Data discovery, yes. Yeah. I will definitely second that. Anything? Yeah. Attribute? Yes.
Security
And
with speed.
With speed. Okay, yes.
Anything
Anything else?
The automation, deployment automation.
Okay, cool. Yep. What about business requirements? Getting requirements from the business folks, knowing what they understand, what they want, delivering it. If your business folks are like my business folks, they articulate exactly what they need perfectly the first time, and we just deliver it now, right? Yeah. So who am I? I like to put on my badge when I go to conferences. I'm the director of awesomeness. That gets a few chuckles, but if I'm introverted enough and other people are introverted enough, it at least gets us a smile. We'll shake hands or high five or something. I work at a school district. We have 20,000 students, about 3,000 staff. Every single one of those students from kindergarten on up have Chromebooks in their hands. They take them home. They keep them in the summer. So when COVID hit, that was really interesting. We got to deal with all that and all the teachers. But that's what we do. I have a certification as a CTO. That's part of the thing. Really great group. So I'm a board member for a statewide chapter for all of California for educators and technology. So that's really fun. And we work closely with Microsoft and Google and a lot of others on procurement and other things, and we do a lot of training as well. But I love talking about high-performing organizations. I like presenting anything that's fun. Thank you for having me here. I love groups like this. I haven't had a chance to be part of them as much between personal and work life, but I used to be. But I just love being with groups where we talk about this stuff. I was part of the Inland Empire.NET users group, which is where I met Lynn. She's great. We had a lot of fun there. Just for some of the fun stuff we used to do, I was a full stack developer at the time, and we got to present at the SQL 2008 Firestarter event that Microsoft did. They did this around the country when 2008 came out. And so I was in Irvine presenting on that. That was a lot of fun. Any of you guys remember the Windows Phone 8 that came out? So we were actually, our group was chosen by Microsoft also to teach developers how to develop for it. And then 2 years later, it all got disbanded. So anyway, other stuff I do, this is outside of work, married to my soulmate, music woodworking stuff. I have 3 kids. My daughter lives in AMA, so I'm really enjoying that right now. And I was part of the original LAN parties. We used to literally put CRTs on our trunk with our huge towers, drive them off to LA, and we'd have about 20 of us in a room with switches and everything else. That was before everything went online, but esports, that would have been my thing. I definitely would have had a scholarship in esports. So the reason why I'm enjoying this, and they asked me to talk, or Lynn offered me, is because she likes to run book studies. She's really fun. She's in bioinformatics, extremely smart. She was really fun to talk to, and she's always passionate about what she does. But she ran a data mesh book study, and she likes to do this. And it's on YouTube, fully streamed. You can go watch it, and then we'll go through chapter by chapter and just kind of discuss it and see what we think and offer ideas.
She has a good offering of courses on LinkedIn Learning.
Yes.
And I just did one yesterday, the one on AWS DevOps.
Okay.
So
Yeah, she's
I know
amazing.
her really well.
She's really friendly, and she knows her stuff.
Yeah, I don't know her in person, but I
Yeah.
know her stuff on LinkedIn Learning. So, and yeah, for better.
Yeah. When I hear her talk about data, it just blows my mind. I'm like, we're not even close to you.
Yeah.
So I like to say 90% of my job is people, and I'm probably lying about the other 10%. So if any of you are in whatever role you're in, and I teach this to all my team, especially with hirings or unfortunately layoffs and other things go right now, our chief job is to provide value to the business, no matter what we do. If we're on the database side, if we're on the front end side, if we're on the help desk, if we're at the board meeting or anything like that. I also like to champion investment ITs and investment in organization. Unfortunately, some companies have lost sight of this, or they never realized it. They're cutting IT staff when they're trying to grow revenue or decrease, expenditures in another area. They almost see IT as waste, which is twofold. Either they don't recognize it, or maybe their IT team is not showing it. Probably a little bit of both. But this is something I really try to champion and we work on. This is our mission statement: to exemplify the essence of quality and service and be recognized as authority of wisdom. So at a school district, there are 900 teachers. They're very union strong, very wonderful. When money starts getting cut, they don't see the 28-person IT department as a very large group. We just don't have a lot of weight. So my focus is, let's be the best we can be, because I want 900 teachers saying, don't you dare cut our IT people. They're the ones that help me teach. They're the ones that help my kids get on Chromebooks. They're the ones that help Zoom works and all that kind of stuff. But being recognized, that's an external thing. We can make quality and service the best thing that we've ever seen, but that if we do it well, hopefully other people will recognize us for what we do. And so when esports comes and 3D printers and Steam and getting kids online and all this cool stuff, and let's coordinate with this school in New Zealand, I want them calling IT to say, how do I do this really cool stuff? Because you're the people who can do it for me, rather than calling saying, why is this broken again? So our agenda today, we're going to do a quick overview of data mesh just so that you understand where we're going. But in order to understand why, who cares about data mesh or why it's around, we're going to talk about the current landscape. We're going to dive into what it is. How is in italics? Because they're still figuring this out. This is new. The big three, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, are still trying to figure out their approach to this. And like you mentioned, the speed and the agility and all that stuff, that's a complex nut to crack. So we'll see. And we'll talk about some real world applications. I'm interested to read more about the Intuit one. So expectations, this is new and it's changing. So stuff that I'm going to show you today, you might see an article tomorrow. Maybe Microsoft talked at their Fabric conference last week, and it kind of changes some of the stuff that we're talking about, or at least puts their spin on it. But we're all here to learn together. This is brand new to me. We went through the book study. It's really cool, and I've been learning as much as I can, but still, this is new stuff. And anytime you have new technologies, it changes. So if you have any ideas, if you have anything that resonates with you, if you have anything that you're concerned about, feel free to shout it out. I know in tech conferences, we are really good at finding flaws in other people's arguments. And so if you want to do that, that's fine. I'm okay. It's not my argument, but it's fun to talk about this stuff because that's when I learn more. So what is data mesh? Is this just another shiny fad, new complexity, address some problems and add others? We've seen a lot of that over the years. Or is it something more fundamental? So that's what we're going to try and figure out. So Zamek Dagani, she's amazing, extremely intelligent. She's the one that wrote the book that we went through. And she actually, while data mesh is based off a lot of smart work and a lot of incredible people, she's the one that's kind of brought it together in a overall concept. And so she founded it back in 2018. And she's been championing it a lot. She works at ThoughtWorks, is on their technology advisory board. So that being said, some of the images you're seeing, most of them, a lot of the concepts are directly from her. I'm not trying to steal them. I'm not saying they're mine. I'm just sharing what we've learned. And I'll have my own comments too. I'd love to hear your guys' ideas. So just FYI. So as we talk, the principles are mainly, she's got 4 pillars, and one is domain ownership. Who actually owns the data? Because that's an interesting concept to dive into. Data as a product. This isn't just numbers and bits and it's in a parquet file or it's on this server or whatever. What does that mean? Self-serve data infrastructure, which gets exactly to what you were asking about over there. And then federated computational governance. So those are the 4 pillars. And now that I've told you what they are, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of data in her eyes, the things that I've seen. And then we'll come back to exactly what these mean. So part of all this is, why do we care? Why do we care about data? Why do we care about making it better and faster? And the whole thing goes back to, you want to work for high performance organizations. You want organizations to value what you do. And high performance organizations are really quick, the high ones are really quick at identifying what adds value and what creates waste. And they're good at eliminating the waste and capitalizing on the value. And so when you see the Netflixes, you see the Amazons start the cloud world, all these kinds of things, you're seeing companies that are watching a paradigm shift, or they're creating it themselves. They're able to capitalize on it. A lot of their companies can't. And there's a lot of it, their bureaucracies, business processes, or whatever. They've found that the way that they used to do business is no longer fitting the way they need to do business. And so that's where this comes into play.
Do you have any visibility into big companies that are laying off non-AI people to hire AI?
That I don't. And that is an interesting question. Now, during COVID, a lot of companies hired big, and they hired way more because they were capitalizing on the fact that they had a lot of captive audiences at home, and how do we make use of that? And then now that that's dropped off and a lot of people have gone back to work in some capacity, we've seen a lot of layoffs. Now, from the statistics I've heard, we're still, from a technology standpoint, higher than we were pre-COVID. But we've seen a lot of layoffs because they hired a lot more. Now, the other reason they hired a lot more is because money was freely available. The government and loans and stuff were making things really cheap. So if you're a Netflix, a Microsoft, a Zoom, a WeWork, you're going to decide, how do we get a lot of money and change things? Netflix, Zoom, they went through the roof. WeWork had a little bit of a different problem because no one wanted to leave their house to go to work anymore at a place that they were paying for. So those are interesting ideas. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people hiring for AI. Are they cutting other areas? And so that's a good question. I don't know. Does anyone else know about that? I'm going to look that up.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I do know in my job that AI is making a difference in terms of productivity.
Yes.
The one thing I think that would happen is if you're those code camp type graduates,
Mhm.
you would need those in.
Mhm.
And really, you mentioned Copilot or GitHub Copilot. Is that one or Microsoft?
No, we're good with Microsoft, although we've been playing with ChatGPT for 9 months. Yeah.
No, the reason I bring it up is the GitHub Copilot is something we're actually piloting right now. And the one thing I realized is that's pretty much everybody. If you had a GitHub repo that was public, they were using that to train them. Yeah.
Right.
You're getting all that now.
And you're getting the quality of that too.
Yeah.
So hopefully.
I'm sure I kept them on their toes to figure everything out.
So yeah, interesting. But back to fast performing companies. Again, how much can you shorten that lead time from when you have an idea to when it's actually creating value? When is it either making money for the company or reducing costs somewhere? So when Netflix has this idea, hey, how do I do something? How fast is it on your phone? You hear about things next practice and best practice, and it makes me laugh at some of the terminology. But really, the whole idea is always you're doing your best practice, right? Otherwise, why would you do it? You're going to do what you think is the best. And so the instant you find, oh, I've got no idea, this actually is a little better way to do things, you say, okay, well, shoot, that's a better practice. What we're doing is the best idea that we have right now. But circumstances change, technology changes, knowledge changes, market changes. So you eventually get to a point where you find there's a better way to do things. And so the question, what again defines high performance companies from everyone else, is how fast they can say the instant we realize there's a better place, how fast we put it in production. So why does this have anything to do with data? Well, sometimes data is really hard to move and be agile with, depending on your setup and what your need is. So we've had a lot of organizational complexity over the years. Digitization, everything's digital now. Getting lots of data. We're using it to make decisions more than ever. We've got lots of things. I'm sitting here with my phone. I've got my Apple Watch. I've got a device. I've got everything else. Things everywhere, tracking your fleet vehicles and your monitors. And so, and of course, our customers, they expect everything now on any device they're at. If I'm jogging and I want to order something on my Apple Watch, well, Apple better let me do that. That's the expectation. The legacy is it's hard to ingest that kind of stuff at that speed. It's also, with a lot of our larger data farms and warehouses, it's hard to map every single idea and thing that's under the sun into that unified ecosystem. Dependencies create complexity and it slows value creation. So you create that dependency pipeline. It looks incredible and it runs flawlessly from one end to the other, right? But the instant you're asked to change anything, it can be a little hard. And so IT sometimes becomes a little bit of a bottleneck. So what have we done? And again, I'm from the software development world. So a lot of this and her ideas come from a lot of the domain-driven design community. So we drastically changed the way we think about apps and data. We're now, instead of building these monolith ERP systems and HR systems that had to handle everything in the entire company, we're now developing small purpose-driven apps, right? Purpose-built technology. We're now actually saying, okay, ones and zeros and strings and all that kind of stuff isn't all we want anymore. We want unstructured data. We want PDFs. We want images. We want audio, all that kind of stuff. And then we want technology options versus technology review boards. How many of you have had to deal with a technology review board? There's this really cool thing I learned about at the San Diego engineering talk. Can I use it? No, it doesn't fall within our boundaries of what we're allowed to, what we know how to support. And so Zemek came up with this type of stuff, or at least the diagrams and everything. But yeah, so we changed the way we organize these teams. Instead of having these large IT departments, and depending on how large you are, you could have anywhere from 100, falling into, here's your data group, here's your ops groups, here's your development group, all that kind of stuff. Well, we've changed that. So now instead of being functionally divided, we've got smaller teams. We've got domain inclusive teams. Now, when you're trying to come up with a new app or a product on your phone, you've got the engineers in there, the data engineers, the ops people, the security people, and then you've got the business people in there too. And this is what a lot of things are championing. So, and then Zemek also realized we've kind of switched the way that we've had a relationship with data. In the beginning, it used to be what she said, function generates data. So basically, your websites, your customers, your point of sale, that created all this data. We would make reports out of them and the leadership would decide what to do. Here's different inventory levels we need, products or whatever. Well, now that we have ML and everything else, the data we gather is actually the one making decisions. It's the one that's feeding you your recommended stuff, whether you're looking at Amazon or Netflix. Here's your next movie you should watch, Facebook or whatever social media you want. Here's what we think you should see. Well, that's data that's now generating those features and a lot of those business decisions. So she said, okay, so that's flipped. Back in the day, this is once fun. I don't know if you remember the day that, if you're Microsoft people or otherwise, but there used to be a stack or a very small stack where you could handle all of your stuff in your company. Give me SQL Server, give me integration services for all my data pipelines, give me reporting services for my reporting to my leadership and all around, and analysis services for data warehousing. I could do everything you pretty much needed me to do in one stack. And it was fairly simple. It was all on-prem.
If I can add, the things we couldn't do with that stack, we said weren't possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is what I experienced.
Yes.
So we did a heck of a lot, and then the other 10 to 50% are like, oh, that's impossible. It's not a data problem. Go
Yeah.
hire some software developers and deal with it.
Right, yeah. Or I need bigger servers. I can't run that analysis report by Monday morning, So, but yeah, we had our data plan on the left side. We did our ETLs, put it in there in that data warehouse or something, and we did our metrics for people. Not too much different, except for now that we have our smaller groups, right? We're creating all these small little fun apps. We're doing some really neat stuff. We still have our data pipelines, but boy, people said, okay, but in order to do ML, I need the data from the finance people and the sales people and the marketing people, and what the product people are thinking or whatever. We still had to get the data from all these different places into one place so that we could run models and figure it out. And so that created a lot of this, what she calls accidental complexity. And we reversed the letters too. We were doing ELTs now. And the reason was we had to have this lake. Stop pre-assuming what data I want tomorrow. So rather, in the old data warehouse days, we used to say, well, what do you want? Oh, I want a report that shows me X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, that data is scattered over millions and millions and trillions of records. Well, let me gather all that through a process and deliver you exactly what you need. And they'd say, that's great, add one more column. And I'm, oh gosh, I gotta go rebuild my career. So we didn't know what people wanted, and that was causing a bottleneck. And then suddenly it was like, well, give me access to the data, give the finance analysts and whoever else, give them access to the data. So they wanted all the data so they could decide what was important to them. So we have our lakes now, we throw all the data in there and, data swamps and whatever you want to call it. But we had to move to richer tools to do all that stuff. And so Matt Turk is a fun guy. He creates lots of things. And he does this every year. It's called the Machine Learning Artificial Intelligence Data Landscape, or MAD. But this is the latest one he just put out, and these are all the tools. Now, of course, if you ask a software developer to do a similar map, you'd see things all over the place. Are you a React person? Are you an Angular person? Are you in cloud? Are you on-prem? Are you rolling around? Whatever.
Or the CNCF one, that doesn't matter to me.
But then you get the funny tweets. Oh, it's easy to succeed in data and AI. All you need is to put data into a data warehouse for OLAP. Let's use it ELTL or ELT. Let's spot any issues with all that stuff. Let's run SQL for some BI, reverse ETL into SAS. It just goes on and on. Well, this is comical, of course, but it has gotten really complex. But this is necessary, right? I mean, this is where businesses and stuff have gone. And so, as Emek was saying, okay, in 2005, our chief issue was volume. We didn't have enough servers and storage and fast enough storage and cheap enough storage to handle all this. Well, we got there. Okay, and well, now we're dealing with a lot of variety of data. It's not the same shape it used to be. We've got streaming data now that needs to be real time. We've got IoT with tiny data packets, but there's millions of them. We have, again, unstructured data. So we've got images and sound and other things. We've got heart rate monitors and all this other stuff. So we had to figure out how to handle a variety. And then in 2010, we had the velocity because now everyone's got internet. We've got cell phones on our watches and everywhere else, right? So just the mass amount of ingest is crazy. And so she's now saying our biggest issue right now is organizational complexity. And that's where we've gotten. So, okay, so that's where we're at. Argue with it if you want. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm happy with it. But she's come up with, okay, how do we fix this? Because again, she likes to think about these large, high-scale issues. And so her approach, she's coined as data mesh. But instead of these monolithic centralized bottlenecks of these huge data lakes where everything's in there, she wants to break things up, bring data closer to the business domain, and we'll talk about that. Close the gap between operational and analytical data. So you have all your operational data, that's your swipes, everything going on right now, your clicks and everything else. And that usually overnight or through some process gets moved into an analytical place. She wants to bring those closer. And there's other things, and we'll talk about here, but basically, let's talk about who owns the data. Let's figure out how to better use it. Let's talk about new data platforms and what that means and how do we automate governance policy and other stuff we have to worry about. So we'll see if she is able to accomplish this. And if you heard, spoiler alert ahead of time, some people have done this and they're doing fairly well with it. So people are taking notice of this. So it's interesting. Yeah.
So a question about data mesh, the principle itself. So I guess we are going back to having silos of data. My question is, you're training like let's say machine learning models or LLMs which require huge amount of data. So you will eventually have to get them together again.
Yes.
So why have these silos then?
So a little bit like software development, we got used to developing these large complex programs, and we realized that while I need a lot of different data and someone else needs a lot of different data and someone else needs a lot of different data, we don't need the same data, right? And so the complexity of building this massive ecosystem with all this permissions and governance and making sure all the schema works and everything, and it's always on all the time, creates a lot of dependency and a lot of inflexibility. So we'll talk about her approach to silos, because you're right. If you look, a lot of retailers now, Target was a big one that was in the news several years ago because they went all API, and they were able to keep up with the Walmarts and the Amazons when a lot of other companies were going under because they just couldn't compete on scale, and Target figured out how to do it. And it's like, how do we create these data silos? So if you're a marketing person, you're like, hey, we got Starbucks and a lot of our targets. How cool would it be if people could shop on their phone while they're having a coffee and then suddenly it's ready for their car when they're ready to go out there? How do you do that in a few weeks or a few months? How do we change the way we shop and have it brought to our car during COVID and no one's allowed to touch each other? So Target was able to do a lot of that because they figured out, how do we make our data productized so that the person who says, I only need this amount of data and I have permissions and authority to use it. Now they might create their own copy of it. And this is, oh my gosh, I'm going to have multiple copies of the same data somewhere. Who's got the source of truth, right? Well, that's hairy stuff. We got to figure that out. But we realized that the old way wasn't helping us anymore. So we'll talk about a little bit of that. But one thing she talks about is domain ownership, and this is near and dear to my heart. So she says, let's keep the data as close to the domain, as close to the context users as much as possible. When we pull it out of 50 disparate systems and we put it in a data lake, there's a very real mismatch that we've just had there because now it's in a place and it's in a format that a lot of the business owners frankly don't understand. And also, it allows them to abdicate most responsibility for it. So I'll tell you, in our own organization, we deal with a lot of HR data. And we'll get requests. I need this information. I need that information. And for some reason, it's up to the technology department to decide who's allowed to have access to this. Well, we're really good with permissions and Active Directory and clicking and all this other stuff. I don't know HR law. I don't know compliance. Shouldn't the HR people be deciding, well, fiscal is allowed to have access to this, and principals are allowed to have access to this, and IT, you don't get access to everything. Your help desk guy, all he really needs when he answers the phone is needs to know who the person is, what job title they have, and where they're working, right? So let's keep all of that as close to the department who's creating the data. The other interesting thing is when we create reports for HR, I'm sure all of you are used to this. You look in a fiscal or ERP or HR system, and there are all kinds of normalized tables and other things. And you're like, I don't understand what code 1378 is. Oh, go look over here, and that's a blah, 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 blah. That makes perfect sense to them. It doesn't make sense to me. We have to learn what HR context is in order to build data that works for them. How cool would it be if HR themselves were taught how to build some of this stuff? And then they can expose only the elements that make sense. I don't need to see 60 different tables, or maybe I only need to see a couple of four for my particular need. So keep that internal domain understanding with them, the terminology and governance, and give them the option to use their own technologies. If they're dealing with fast streaming data that is unstructured, let them use tools that works for that. The fiscal team, if they're dealing with highly normalized tables, then let them deal with that. Let them have their own technologies to deal with that. And again, these are ideas that we've already done in the development world with domain-driven design and creating little camps, self-organized teams of developers working with business. We'll teach them a lot of different technologies and ideas and tools, but every single team doesn't have to use the same tool. Hopefully we're promoting best practices, but they're not required to go and use that same data technology just because the other team down the hallway is. As Amek talks about, she got a lot of great information from Marty Kagan. Really liked the way they described data as a product, and data should be valuable, usable, feasible, and the intersection of all that. And so in the book, they talk about how do you create great products that customers like. Well, it should have all of these three. And it's not entirely new. There's another book called Project to Product And then again, this is talking about building great applications when you're doing digital transformation and why we care about this. If you're aware of IDLE, these are best practices to use in operation environments, technology operations, and they have what's called, what is a suitable product? It's something that does what we expect it to do, it's dependable, and it actually provides benefit and people like to use it. Chances are, if you're able to hit all of these three, you're developing something that's worthwhile. And so she talks about, okay, data as a product. What does that mean? She says it has to have all of these usability characteristics, but self-contained in a single unit. And we'll talk about it. That's a big thing for her. She calls it a data quantum. That terminology didn't sit really with me as far as something I could really understand and gravitate towards. But basically, whatever you build needs to have all of these. It needs to be secure, discoverable, like we mentioned, understandable. It has to be trustworthy. I'm not going to use your data if you tell me this thing's 3 weeks old, right? Depending on what I need. It has to be accessible. So she's saying all of the stuff that we provide, if I'm the HR department and I am providing employee data to fiscal and benefits, hopefully your healthcare is getting managed, hopefully you're getting paid, hopefully IT is giving you the right permissions into all the various systems you need. Well, then HR, that is their domain, that's their product. That is part of their service that they are offering to the rest of the organization, right? And when you start to think about this, it's like, oh, this is an IT's job to make a really nice self-contained, HR employee system that is shot in 15 million different places because all these other apps need it. What if HR, who understood their own data and their own domain better than anybody, what if they're the ones that were able to build the products and then offer them for service to the fiscal team, to the data team, to, not the data team, to IT or whoever. So this is what she's starting to run towards. Just as an example for one of these, she's like, it needs to be natively accessible. So on the right-hand side, she's saying whatever you build, a lot of our data pipelines right now are purpose-built. I need an ML model to predict customer success for X. California wildfire insurance. How much at risk is the home that they're building or they want to insure? And maybe we're not going to insure that home. These are purpose-built ML models a lot of times using purpose-built data. So what she's saying is we kind of need to get out of that. We're going to build 50 different tools trying to satisfy 50 different people's needs. What if we build a product that has the elements that people want and then they can build their own tools? Now they might take data from 8-10 different products and put it together in their own system, but that's perfectly fine. Let them do that. So, she's saying we got our data analyst that needs insights spreadsheets. So we've got another analyst that likes to do queries. They're going to make reports. We got data scientists that like to train ML models, and we got app developers. So how do we handle all that? Well, just as an example, again, the big three are approaching this in different ways and trying to woo people to their clouds, and of course the private the companies also. But Microsoft Fabric example, every time you create a data set in their Fabric, it automatically comes to SQL endpoint. So if you're a SQL person, you can hit it, run SQL to your heart's content, and it looks like SQL to you. It may be Parquet files and maybe other things behind the scenes, but it looks like SQL. You can do joins and everything. There's an API layer you add on top of that. So you expose API endpoints with different security and different models behind it. It's fine if you want to use that, that's great. The data set is also instantly available based on permissions to your Power BI folks, your ML folks, people who would naturally use a Microsoft data set in its native form. What's also really neat is they actually have a file system component. So if you have a Parquet file or something sitting in Fabric and you expose it to users, they can literally go to, it's a URL, but it's a path in Windows, and it shows up like a folder. And so they can open an Excel spreadsheet, add data to it, close it, and it's instantly sent to Fabric. And in Fabric, it may have nothing to do with a table structure. And so I know in our own department, we've got some people that are like, Matt, I work in spreadsheets all day long. I don't understand SharePoint. I don't want to click in little things. I use Excel all day long. Well, now we can say, okay, in certain circumstances, if all you're doing is updating, again, in our point area, we have a list of vendors that we deal with. Okay, someone decides which vendors to work with and what their contracts are. That's in a database in their fiscal system, which we don't have access to. So they keep it in a separate spreadsheet. So now they can update their vendor spreadsheet in Excel and we get it ingested into Fabric, and they have no clue that they're not actually working on an Excel spreadsheet. So these are some of the interesting things that vendors are starting to do. And I'm sure Amazon and Google have their own example of things like that too. So the whole point of a product is you intend it to be used. It is a service of that department now. So HR, they are proud of that service. This is a product they provide. It is up-to-date, reliable, responsible employee information that any department in the company can use. And instantly that works. That's the point of it. Another example I thought of is, they've got the legend. I tried to verify if this was true. And I see a lot of blog posts and a lot of articles, but it's hard for me to verify if it's actually true. But you may have heard that years ago, Jeff Bezos basically put an mandate out to all his developers. And he said all service interfaces, without exception, must be designed from the ground up to be made external. And this is their whole AWS infrastructure. Just because inside Amazon, you are shifting data back and forth between our different microservices, that's not good enough to have it in undocumented and unsecured and unreliable. You need to build this as if some external customer is going to be paying us money to use this. And so, again,
Actually, I don't know these exact words, but no, I've heard it.
Right?
Similar, yeah.
And this was back, I want to say 2004, 2005 or something. This was at the inception of AWS. And I thought that is a really amazing standard to put in the ground, because right from the get-go, you were building quality and dependability into something that you're like, I may use this, I don't know, but the guy down the hallway, he may use it. And I don't want the phone call when the thing breaks because he's using my library and I made a change to it. So she also talks about self-serve infrastructure. Okay, well, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, we're putting a lot of requirements and criteria into this data mesh concept. Well, how the heck is that going to be possible? So again, she talks about this data quantum. So that product that you're building, rather than having one massive place that all your pipelines are in, they're getting data from all over the place. The pipeline is built into that product. Your code, I just lost it. Your notebooks and all that other stuff, whatever it is, your data connectors, everything is inside that one product. And so it is self-contained, easy to maintain, or easier. It's limited on its dependencies to everything else. It should be dependent on other products, or maybe the actual direct source of the data if it's the first stop, and that's fine, but it should not be dependent on this huge entire ecosystem that may have issues. And so it needs to be small, cohesive, but everything needs to be in there. And so if that's the case, well, again, this is easier to maintain. We've limited our team the knowledge they need to have to create their product and keep it running. Data discovery is a big one. I have yet to see any tool, at least that I've used, have really great data discovery. I'll tell you, for 15, 20 years, we've always heard, here's this great reporting tool. It's all web-based. It's so nice and easy. Crystal tried to do it. Tableau did it. Power BI. Everyone tries to do it. And the whole idea is throw this at your finance people, give them access to the database, and they'll create all their own reports. IT will never have to create a report ever again. I have yet to see that happen. Either the tool's a little complex to use, but the biggest issue is data discovery. How do they find out where the data is that they need? And so that, again, is part of this self-serve infrastructure. When all your products are in there and you've exposed just the data that it provides, you're also adding to it things like quality checks. How old is the data? Is this, milliseconds old? Is this weeks old? Where's the lineage in it? And so when people look at the data, they can understand what I'm seeing. If I need sales figures, am I seeing the right one? Because there's a lot of different ones. And the platform itself, when you publish this product, it should self-investigate all of that. And it should produce it in a way that is always dynamic, always updating. Every time you push a new piece of code or a new product through your pipeline, the data platform should automatically auto-discover that and apply everything. This is where I'm really interested to see LLMs come into play, like ChatGPT and other stuff, because a lot of business folks don't understand how to ask or seek out data the right way. And I think how cool with it, again, let's take a Microsoft idea. If Copilot, and they do have a Fabric Copilot they just announced, if I have my data in Fabric and my fiscal team is saying, oh, we need the latest whatever, So as a school district, we have to write grants all the time. And one thing they always ask you in your grant is what's your demographics, what's your population, your attendance, your hardship, your poverty rates, all that kind of stuff. And so one of my friends who writes grants, he's like, I just can't wait until I can ask Copilot, give me the latest demographics for attendance, foster youth, all this kind of stuff, and have it go, here you go. I thought that would be the holy grail, but maybe we're getting close to that. Yeah.
I think I missed the point. When you say fabric, what are you referring to?
I'm sorry. So Microsoft Fabric is their umbrella term for their entire data cloud service. Does that make sense? And I'm saying that very broad on purpose because they had lots of other names and they've changed it. Fabric is the most recent name, but now you're seeing Fabric on everything. So their cloud SQL Server databases are all under Fabric now. SharePoint, their OneDrive, their file system is all under Fabric now. So their data pipelines are all under Fabric. So, and then built into this self-service infrastructure should also be your quality monitoring, auditing. If your pipeline goes down or hiccups, it should know how to alert someone. If I have pushed a new version of a product, just like you would, I don't know, software developer, but if I commit my code to GitHub and my continuous integration pipeline started running and it committed and published this code and it's now on phones and apps and something broke, same thing with data. If I push a new change to my data product, the system should come back and tell me if the test failed before it makes it live. And that's the whole point of that. Yeah.
So in addition to data discovery, I was at that you may have mentioned, like a thought for how do I do this, or actually where we're going is do this for me.
Yeah.
And I know that Adobe has announced that they're putting that in their whole suite. I haven't tried it yet, but would it be cool to like make that part of the requirements for new life?
Yeah, and I think about all the fun things we can do. So one thing Lynn mentioned several times in a lot of our talks, she's like, realized that LLMs have made English or whatever language you're speaking in, your natural language is now the de facto code language. I don't need to learn Python and the syntax. I don't need to learn this, and that. And of course, there's boundaries on that. But how cool would it be if you could naturally say, build me a graph that says how to do this? Now, Power BI does that a little bit. It's got, once you get your data set in there, you can ask it some questions. Show me the latest sales for the last 2 months in a bar graph across regions, and it'll do it for you pretty well.
Excel did a VLOOKUP.
Right. So that's where it's going. I know I'm going fast and I'm throwing a lot at you, but again, it's a long book. There's a lot of great detail in there, and so I definitely say let's dive into some of that. But I wanted to give you guys an intro of what she's doing. So again, the goals of all this is reduce the total cost, decentralizing data. One of the reasons why we centralized so much is because the context people, the domain people, the business folks don't understand the data pipelines. And maybe it's not cost effective to hire a whole bunch of data engineers between your operations, your pipeline folks, your ML designers, all that kind of stuff. Oh, I apologize. So if the infrastructure is dynamic and self-running and the context people are understanding how to craft products and do connectors, they don't have to do too much more, can we reduce the cost of getting people, of splitting this into their proper areas. Reducing the cognitive complexity. So I put platform as a service. As a school district, we have a very small number of engineers, so we are eagerly looking at cloud, and finally, for us anyway, it's starting to become cost effective. Because I'll tell you right now, my few engineers, when we're dealing with 20,000 Chromebooks that are online and state testing, and I don't know if you know this, but when your kiddo, if you have any, are in school, they are at high school, they've got, for us, 56 minutes from the start class to the end of class. If their Chromebook takes 15 minutes to connect, I've just lost a quarter of their class period, and now I've got teachers yelling at me. These are the type of pressures we're dealing with. I can't afford to have my engineers racking and stacking servers. I can't afford to have them replacing failed power supplies and storage and things like that. That is not a value add for them. And so that's why we're looking at this. But it's kind of the same thing. Where's the value add? Is the value add in building the permissions and the governance structure and all of these monitoring tools to make sure PII is not getting into the right place or something? And so if we can build a platform that does that. Now, this is where the data engineers will continue to reside because they're the ones building and maintaining the platform. They're not building products anymore, but they're building the platform that keeps all this running. And so that's where she's starting to see the focus of the data engineers rather than having this huge group of data engineers or putting data engineers in all the different business units. Let's create a system that the data engineers work on and maintain and keep running so that the business units themselves can build their own products. So this is kind of her diagrams. I apologize, it's kind of small, but on the right-hand side is the old way, self-serve, service central data repositories for everybody. If you have data anywhere, it has to go in here. As a company, we have adopted XYZ as our data platform, and that's where your data goes. No ifs, ands, or buts. And she's saying, no, let's do domain-oriented teams. They put their data where they need to put it, but it's their job to make sure it's accessible. Manage autonomous interoperable products. Again, the code, the data, the policy is all in one unit. It's nice and self-contained, as opposed to we have these huge pipelines where maybe the code is at one end and then we have all these pipelines and then we have more code with ML and other things. And the use of the data has been spread out across a lot of different teams and added to complexity. So these are things that she's trying to do. Again, not going all of it, but favoring decentralized technologies, domain agnostic instead of domain aware. I am the HR department. I don't care who needs my data. I am going to make data available with restrictions on privacy and things like that. But honestly, if you need an employee list, I'm going to make it available as my product. I don't care if fiscal wants it, IT wants it, whoever wants it. They can, and then tomorrow there's going to be some other group that says, oh, I need access to your data. That's fine. Here's the product. Go get it. Maybe we need to adjust permissions, but I don't have to rebuild something for you. And then the federated governance is the last thing. So domain data context aware governance. Again, I don't understand HR law and compliance, so don't put that on IT to ensure that we are applying proper permissions. Let's build the permission structure into the system somehow. HR can use role-based security and say, here are the job titles that are allowed to have access to this data, and then let the system now through APIs or SQL queries or whatever maintain that. If I log in and I say, oh, I've got a file system here, let me open up my cool spreadsheet that's actually in Fabric on the background. Hey, Matt, you're not of the right role. And I know you don't know where this data actually comes from, but built into the product is the permissions that you're not allowed to have access to. How cool would that be? So again, we're holding accountability at the domain level. So each department holds their own account. They're the chief stewards of that data. Policies are embedded into the data, into the product, I mean. And we have dynamic permissions direct from the source all the way through the applied access. So where the data is ingested, if there's privacy, fiscal, healthcare, whatever, policies around this data, how about at the moment I pull it out, I am tagging that data with who's allowed to see it based on my criteria. And I don't mean who like Matt's allowed to see it. I mean who like roles are allowed to have access to this. And it follows that data all the way through from its inception to wherever it goes. And then the other thing she talks about is when you apply these policies, the bottom bullet there is you start with your regulations, your legal compliance, your federal and state mandates. That's maybe overarching. Then below that, you have your organizational policies. And then below that, you have your product owners. So again, fiscal data. There's certain state and federal regulations about what we're allowed to share. But internally, we have people who are allowed to see and people who aren't. And so the fiscal team should be determining that. And so again, the goal is to embrace a dynamic changing environment, because that's really where we're in. If you want to be fast and flexible, and they say, we have this new need, you better get the data for us because we need it right now. How do we get there? So let's embrace that as a mindset. So this is, again, one of her diagrams on federated governance. And the idea is, so in the red box, this is the actual product. And we may have policies on the product itself. So again, fiscal, I may have policies on who internally is allowed to have access to this data. The domain has local policies. So fiscal, they'll have policies over their whole, all their fiscal products. And then that's all handled by the data platform, but then we're going to have policies for the organization level. and again at the top level, our legal compliance. And so she's trying to figure out how do we apply policies and permissions in a organized way from the bottom that's dynamically handled, rather than I've created 20 Power BI reports, and I'm picking on Power BI just because that's what we use. Oh wait, this report was for this people, and this is reports for those people. And I have to manually, in Power BI with row level security, apply who's allowed to see this report, even though the data I got came from a server that also has permissions built in on who's allowed to see the report. Not the report, but the data when they're ingesting it. I realized, at least in our organization, we apply the same permissions at several different points, from when the data is inputted by the user who's actually logging in the system, through our data pipelines, our reports, and everywhere else. And you kind of get frustrated. Like, I have this data that's really important in 15 different ways. One's for a board report, one's for KPIs, one's for principals, one's for internal, one's for state. And all 5 places I've had to put the same permissions on who's allowed to do it, because in the system we have right now, the permissions are placed on the endpoint, not at the inside, right? So that's what we're kind of going for here. She kind of says these 4 principles work together. You can't take one out or it breaks, and you hopefully don't need any more. And I don't mean for you to have to read through all this. Again, hopefully what I've discussed kind of helps. But a lot of this doesn't work without, say, a self-serve data platform. We can't afford to hire more and more engineers to try and build this thing. It has to be self-service. It has to be dynamic. Let's build the tool. We have to keep it secure. So the federated computational governance, domain ownership, it all kind of falls apart again if all the departments are abdicating their role and responsibility and how they're producing data and making it available. So this is another interesting diagram I saw from her that I thought, okay, this makes a little more sense to me. So at the bottom level, you have your apps, your microservices, your legacy apps, whatever. These are your on-prem servers, could be in the cloud, doesn't matter. These are your fancy new ones. So these are your domain app devs. They're building this. The second level is your data products. So you've got your analytical services, your data plane. This is where the data that's used across your organization sits, is on that second level. Well, okay, now that we have that, how do you even make that work? Well, the bottom is the actual data mesh system that's orchestrating everything. So this is your data platform team. The data platform team aren't building reports and everything else. They're still maintaining the system, what your people who are used to working on pipelines and everything else. They're still running the system, but this is the data mesh platform that makes all this possible. And so with that, her idea is we've got all of our data products and stuff on the left side. It feeds insight into our BI metrics, our services, our recommendation algorithms, all that kind of stuff, which then feeds actions. Either your customers are clicking on things, your fiscal department is making decisions, or it's driving other decisions internally, metrics and things turning on and off. And based on all those actions, we get more data. And then you just keep going around and around. But she sees this as a fluid way of providing value. Yeah.
So, to your example, like employer data and what foundation data, the compliance and regulation and how that stuff operates, doesn't this require like a shift, I guess, in how an employer would hire for their organization too, right? Like, so if somebody's building like a bunch of employer data sets that they're going to own, doesn't now the HR department need some like HR analyst that specializes specifically in this?
Yes.
So, yeah, okay. Because it seems like a lot of the organizations do, or not a lot, but there's a good chunk that do like the hub and kill model, right? Where like, I would say even our organization kind of does that, but you kind of have people you hire that are technical, and then you put them onto teams, and then hopefully over time, they can learn the business side, but it definitely takes a while. So yeah, I was just curious.
No, you're right. They're gonna have to start building analyst type capacity and data capacity within their own organizations. And she's saying the flip side of it, and again, software development, Agile has tried to do this. So rather than having a team of 100 engineers doing all the work for the entire thing, they might still have 100 engineers, but what they've done is broken them up into teams, and they work with the fiscal, they work with this. Now, fiscal doesn't have data developers and stuff, but they have context, they have subject matter experts, right? And they work hand in hand. And so the idea is if we build a platform where we're sucking your data out, but you're crafting the product, you're exposing the endpoints. An analyst, depending on the system, again, this is a lot of really high level stuff. We're talking about a dream system here. But if the analyst is in their program and they're entering data and they've got drop downs, for employee records, if within that system or somewhere they were able to see it in a way they understand and say, oh, first name, last name, that's perfectly public information. No big deal. Let's tag that this way. Social security number, only certain roles are allowed to see that. Let me tag these roles unless it's anonymized. Well, maybe if I tag this is okay. If it's anonymized, then we can share this data, just that field's removed or whatever. And then the system underneath can expose those endpoints and allow or disallow access to those fields based off of what the analyst or whoever has said. The idea is that we can, now the financial department and the analysts own that data rather than saying, I don't know, you IT guys, benefits needs it, or HR or IT needs it. Don't you guys know it's in there? It's on a machine that has a power button. Aren't you guys the ones who do that? And then how dare you IT guys that someone who should have had access got access, because don't you guys know law and legal and compliance?
It seems kind of similar to like the concept behind this data marks though, right? Like in your warehouse and this complete ownership for specific schemas or something like that.
Yeah, and I see a little bit of the difference being the data mart typically has a pipeline that leads into it.
Yeah.
I don't know who builds that. I don't know who handles the permissions and the governance of that type of thing. If it's all 100% handled within inside the data mart and it's done at an analyst type level, I think that's where she's trying to get. She's trying to get the data engineers out of the long, complex spaghetti pipeline when they might know the path, but they don't understand the context, right? And again, this is a lot of stuff. I'm happy to, there's a lot of unknowns around this.
The other part is, going back to the domain-driven design, because I think that part of the problem is like the siloed business side, or like the HR side of things, and then the IT side of things. In the domain-driven design, that's all supposed to be together. So the first thing you do is create a language of both from the technical to everyone in that group, whether they're ops or business side. You create a lingua franca that says, hey, this is when we say this is what it always is. Whether you do that in code or whether you do that in documentation, that should be something we all understand. So you kind of, I think in doing that, if you have an HR person who you think should be digital, or they come up, right? And while the data engineer type gets more into the business side and can come up, kind of together to come up with the best product.
Yeah. And as it is now, you have some people in some departments that are amazing at what they do and they understand and they're able to articulate it. And then there's a lot of people who aren't. They may be great at their job, but they're not a great communicator, right? Or vice versa. So I agree, and we're almost done. There's only a few things left. So now that you've seen all that, here's some real world applications that she likes to talk about. So she talks about COVID a lot because at the time of COVID, we had a lot of data that needed a lot of sharing, a lot of things that needed to happen. And and then she says, outside of that, just in general, healthcare, this is a place where there's a massive amount of data that no one wants to share. It's very private. I'm just not going to give it away. But the data that, I have personally on my watch and everything else is different data than what my doctor may have, which is different data than what, someone else, my healthcare professional or whatever, my trainer or something may have. So how do we find a way to, and then even different departments within a hospital. So she's saying, if we can build small focused products faster, then we can do things like reducing cancer treatment costs because we're now identifying data and sharing that quicker. We're developing apps quicker. We're, instead of being 2 months for you to see your doctor, maybe it's 2 weeks because we've cut out a lot of the monotony and stuff in between. I'm not sure. So she's talking about stuff like this. One of the things that she worked on is a longitudinal health record, but basically at the bottom is your infrastructure, but in the middle is this set of products between your various healthcare data. It could be your insurance, it could be your benefits, it could be your cardiology stuff, it could be your other stuff, whatever, health and family history. But they built a lot of different products. And then at that was the cloud platform. So we've got all our different technologies that we're using. You pick your flavor of all your different icons. But then we built our products. So we've made this data available in a usable, high quality format that's very focused and very small and constantly maintained. And so now people at the top level are able to grab the data that they need, that they're allowed to have access to, and build these things quicker. You're not putting that request in that's going to take a year to get to, because the data engineers have a year's worth of backlog of work to do. So again, that's the idea. And so they did this with a healthcare company, she doesn't mention who. But these are the metrics they pulled. And so in 2019, they had 20 data products. Now in 2021, again, this is a little bit old, they had over 300. So in 2019, they had 8 consumers of their data. So imagine all the people in your organization, there are people who would like to consume your data. Some could probably make use of it and they just don't even know it's there, or it's too hard to get to, or I have to jump through too many hoops. In 2021, they had 250. So their lead time to create a product, again, from planning to available, went from 2 weeks to 2 hours. Now you think, oh my gosh, a product, how do you do that in 2 hours? Well, that could be a report. You know, doctor needs, I need all of my patients I'm going to see today, and please flag the ones that are critical health conditions or whatever. Click, 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 here's your report for you. Because the data was at a place that they could access and get to and produce that really quick. Whereas in the past, oh, I got to build a whole data pipeline for that because we don't have a source of the data that you're looking for in a format that you need. So I have to go back to the 3 different sources and build my pipeline and get that through and then make it available to you. And honestly, we've got a backlog of work. That's a 2-week project for your report, and then maybe someone else would build in 2 hours. So again, these are metrics that I've seen from the DevOps crew when you talk about how do we change our developer stacks and how do we make things available so that we can get products out there faster. This is the last slide. But when I see numbers like that, this gets really intriguing to me. Now, I've only played with this stuff a little bit. We have Fabric. I've only played with it a little bit. Me personally, I am nowhere near any of this. And I don't know that our particular organization will get there just the way we're structured. Again, we only have a few engineers, and we don't have engineers and analysts in our HR and fiscal and all these other departments. So I don't know if this will work for our idea, but the mindset that in IT, we would build products instead of, so our student data, we probably have 100 different pipelines that take that student data and put it in 1 million different places. I'm over exaggerating, obviously, but we do probably have at least literally 100 different pipelines for our student data. And I would say a good 50% of them get the same data, like student name, age, grade, school they go to, and things like that. What if we can make that internally in IT a product? And now if we keep that product sound, we can build other products off of that are much easier for us to manage, rather than the next time. Our MO right now is, oh, we need student data to go to another place. Okay, we build another pipeline because it's just easier to build a pipeline from start to finish than it is to try and reuse something we already have. But then, we get in there and build the pipeline. How come you're getting the wrong students? Oh, I forgot they didn't want the students who are in virtual school. Oh, I forgot they didn't want students who are transferring and not enrolled yet. Oh, all these rules and context we built into all of our other pipelines that may or may not be documented. If we had that in a product, then maybe we could actually eliminate a lot of errors and speed up the way we do things. But that's the plan behind it. I feel like I talked a whole lot.
I have a couple of questions.
Research, yes, please.